I am Dr. Walter Matwaychuk, and I'd like to welcome you to the Saturday Rational Emotive Behavioral Conversation Hour. As you probably know, I'm a psychologist trained by Albert Ellis, and I practice at the University of Pennsylvania and also teach. I'm a professor of applied psychology at New York University. And I've had the good fortune of being trained by Dr. Ellis and also working with Tim Beck at Center for Cognitive Therapy. And today, instead of doing what we typically do, which is to have a demonstration in REBT with a volunteer, I'm going to be joined by a good friend of mine who I met way back in 1980 when he was a visiting scholar at the Center for Cognitive Therapy at the University of Pennsylvania, the good Dr. Wendy Dryden. So we're going to be taking your questions on REBT, cognitive behavior therapy, psychotherapy in general, and hoping to talk a little bit, have a good conversation that's oriented both to people who are professionals as well as non-professionals, because we have a mixed audience today. So any question you have about REBT and CBT is fair game. And so I'd ask Dr. Wendy Dryden to unmute himself. I think you can do that. And we'll get cracking. Welcome, Wendy. How are you?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Walter. I'd like to correct you on 2 accounts in your introduction. We actually met in 1981, not 1980. And I'm not the good Dr. Dryden. I'm the Dr. Dryden who is good in parts.
Thank you very much for your precision. That's what I love about you, Wendy. You're precise in your thinking, and I've learned so much from you. I would like to get started with the first question, Wendy, and that is, what is your latest writing efforts on? Because as everybody probably knows, or they might not know, Dr. Dryden is one of the most prolific psychologists there ever has been, if not is. And so you've authored how many books, Wendy, or edited?
263, I think, the last count.
I don't have enough time to read them all, but why don't you tell us about your latest book?
It's called I Wish You a Healthy Christmas, Single Session Therapy in Action.
Great. Okay. So let's get cracking here. Who has a question for us? Okay, Omar, why don't you mute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, Doctor, and hi, Wendy. I'm just currently reading Understanding Psychological Health by yourself, Wendy. But I think you wrote it in 2011. I just wanted to ask you, what inspired you to write a credo after each chapter?
I don't know, actually. Looking back, it's I probably wrote it in 2010, because you know these things take a bit of time to get published. So we're going back about 12 years ago. But it seemed to me that it's good to kind of develop something a little bit more elaborate than just a specific belief. It's like a way of believing rather than a specific belief. So I think probably that was in my mind at the time.
Thanks for that. I'm basically doing a review on that book, and I'm doing a review on the Practitioner's Guide to get my full certificate in REBT under Stephen Palmer.
Right.
So it's one of my favourite books at the minute. I keep going back to the Understanding Psychological Health because I've spoke to Martin James Turner because he designed the ARC from yourself.
Let's keep it to questions.
Sorry.
Okay,
yes.
So you want to just conclude?
Yeah, sorry. I was just wanting to say thank you for answering that anyway, Wendy, and I'll continue reading the book.
Yeah.
Good. Hope you enjoy it. Take care.
It's a fine book. I enjoy it too. Megan, would you unmute yourself?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you both. Again, I just want to say thank you. My question is, do we think that taking notes is taking notes an effective way to have this information stick in your brain for someone who hasn't been with this therapy for a few years?
Why not? Definitely. Whenever you write, you probably increase the probability of ideas sticking. So whether you take them during this discussion today or during the course of therapy in session, we often in REBT will encourage people to tape, audio record their sessions. Some of my patients do that, and they could review it at a later time. Because sometimes when you're in the tennis match of the therapeutic process, your cognitive resources aren't quite as available to you. So when you tape record them or take notes, you can
Mhm.
do them afterwards. I think also when people watch this Saturday morning demonstration, which I'll be doing again next Saturday, you have a chance to, again, step back and look at other people. So you have a view from above, if you will, and you're not
Yeah.
involved in the process. So either note taking or audio recording would help.
And I heard that this is being recorded. I got that that pop up when I joined. So I'm assuming that this will be available at a later date. Is that correct?
If Wendy has no problem with that, I'll probably post it on my website.
Okay.
That's fine. Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine with me. Sure. I think if I can sort of bring in my kind of contribution here, I think that we have to distinguish between means and ends. If the end is for the client, and I'm assuming that you're talking about clients, not therapists, about taking notes. Is that right, Megan?
Correct.
Okay. So I think it's the if the end is, that the client takes away something memorable, I think if the person is a note taker, they like writing little notes, then I think that's fine. I think some people like to kind of, make little mind maps or little drawings. I recently saw a Netflix interview with this therapist called Stutz, Stutz, and he used to write. Well, he I think he's still in practice. He writes little kind of drawings for his clients, and he gives them, to them. So I think anything that kind of the therapist and the client can do in the session that is memorable for the client to take away something that it's important for them to take away, I think is good.
Great. Thank you.
All right. How about Airway O? I see your hand is up there.
Hi, Dr. Mayachuk, and hi, Dr. Dryden.
Hi.
It's Awera.
Aware, thank you.
I've been attending these sessions for over a year, and I think they're fantastic. I'm a big fan of what Dr. Mayachuk's delivering. I'm curious, though, in over a year of attending, I have heard either no reference or minimal reference to neuroticism or neurotics in the sessions you're having. I'm curious, do you value the idea of neuroticism? You avoid it altogether? Does it really play a part in your therapy?
Well, I mean, neurotic is a label that describes behavior and emotional responding that I'm not allergic to using. I just don't typically maybe say that. Neuroticism, to be quite frank with you, the definition of it escapes me right now, other than what I remember from graduate school. It's anxiety and tension and some of the same behaviors that we would perfectionism, but I don't usually use the word neuroticism just because I don't even remember the full definition of it. So I generally try to speak precisely as I can.
That makes total sense, especially as I've seen your interaction with some of the participants, but some behavior I may class as that you would never mention. So I'm just curious.
Is your question answered?
No, that was totally fine for me.
Can I just say something? Can I read you a definition that I just found on the web? Neurosis, a mental condition that is not caused by organic disease, but involves symptoms of stress, in brackets, depression, anxiety, obsessive behavior, hypochondria, but not a radical loss of touch with reality. It is an old-fashioned term, Awere, first written about in terms of REBT in Albert Ellis's first book, How to Live and Work with a Neurotic. But I think times have moved on now, and we tend to kind of go along with the times, and the term neurosis has actually dropped out of use. and therefore you wouldn't find either myself or Dr. Matt Waychuk making reference to it.
I should mention that book that Wendy said, How to Live at Work and Home with a Neurotic. Albert wrote very early on in his career, I think in 1950, just before 1960, the year I was born in. He said in a written statement that that was his favorite self-help book. So even though it might be the term dated, it might not. It's not a bad book to get your hands on and read. How to live.
And the pedantic Dr. Dryden will say that it was published in 1957.
There you go. I knew it was. I knew. Yeah. I knew it was very, very early on.
Yeah.
All right. How about Paul?
Yes. I was wondering. Since REBT is a therapy, I was wondering what is the precise philosophy of REBT, because I've heard that a lot vis-a-vis other cognitive therapies. What exactly is the foundational philosophy?
Well, in my view, it's an amalgamation of ancient and modern philosophy that in many ways is rooted somewhat significantly with Stoicism and Epicureanism, and not necessarily completely inconsistent with Tibetan Buddhism. If you consider general semantics, Korzybski's paradigm as a philosophy of sorts, then it's heavily influenced by general semantics. But I think in many ways, REBT is a therapy unto a philosophy of life unto itself. Yeah, it's a therapy, but it also is in my view, a way to live your life, look at life. And so I think it's a little bit different than Stoicism. I was talking about this yesterday with a patient insofar as in Stoicism, there's an effort, if I believe it correctly, to eradicate desirousness, where in REBT, we encourage you to live well with your unfulfilled desires. So I think it's independent of Stoicism and overlaps with these other therapies, but it's or other philosophies, but it's a philosophy unto itself. And is that an answer to your question, or am I missing the point? And then I want to hear what Wendy has to say.
No, I was just wondering, like, it's obviously borrowing from different, many different disciplines. So I was just kind of see if there's some kind of, definite statement, like from this, all else flows down. But okay, I'd like to hear what the doctor would like to say, and see what he says too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are a number of components of the REBT philosophy. I mean, I think Walter hit it on the mark that when ever Albert Ellis has spoken about or written about the philosophy underlying REBT, he has indicated that it is, if you like, an amalgam of different particular sort of viewpoints. But I would refer you to a chapter written by my friend Dr. Matt Waychuk in a book called New Directions in REBT that I edited, which I think came out last year, because I think your chapter in there nicely goes over it, and it's a subject that we could easily devote the next hour to. So I think rather than do that, I would recommend that particular chapter by Walter in the book New Directions in Rationally Motivated Behavior Therapy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. How about Julia or Lulia? I beg your pardon, Lulia.
Hello, it is Julia. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello, everyone, and I would like to ask a question, and I don't know how well it is suitable for the topic of today's discussion, so I will just ask and follow this up. I have a question about how compatible are two forms of therapy, so REBT and ACT by Stephen Hayes. So I find their approach somewhat contradictory in a way that RBT suggests you to very passionately argue with your stupid ideas and thoughts, but AICT just suggests to simply absorb them. So how would you, is there any way to maybe converge these two ways of therapy? And maybe if there is a way, you can give a few tips on how to do that.
Wendy, you want to take a crack at this first?
Well, no, I'll leave it to you because to start with, because you've actually written on this particular subject, haven't you? This has been a specific interest of yours about to what extent REBT can be integrated with other forms of cognitive behavior therapy. So I think you should lead off on that, and then I'll come in on the end.
So you have to understand that Steve Hayes' criticism of REBT, he makes a statement that you can't use language to fix a problem with language. And so he does it, he's not hopeful that improving your semantics is going to in any way help you emotionally and behaviorally. So he thereby emphasizes many experiential interventions. Now, REBT, rooted in general semantics, argues that precise thinking, which is possible to achieve, is a path to emotional well-being and behavioral efficiency. And so if you look at some of the interventions that Hayes does, for example, he encourages people to act in a way that's consistent with their values. This is consistent with REBT's model of behavioral disputing, where we encourage people to do things that are uncomfortable, but that are consistent with their long-term goals, even if they're uncomfortable in the short run. So I don't see them as necessarily incompatible. I think the theories are more incompatible. Now, Steve Hayes talks a lot about acceptance, and he's talking, in my view, largely about experiential acceptance. So, for example, his argument is that people don't like to experience internal pain in the form of thoughts or feelings, and so they do whatever they need to do to escape the experience of those thoughts or feelings. They may use drugs, sex, behaviors, where and so he encourages people to engage with those thoughts and feelings. And we likewise do in REBT encourage that form of acceptance, but we go beyond that and encourage unconditional life acceptance and unconditional self-acceptance and other acceptance. So I don't necessarily see them as incompatible. I think the theories are more incompatible. Some of the interventions that Hayes uses, the metaphors and the stories, I think if you abstract the underlying idea of the metaphor or the story, they would not be inconsistent with some of the goals of REBT. So in my view, many of the ACT ideas can be integrated. But you know what? Here's the thing. I think the direction of integration should be taking ACT interventions and adding them to the REBT theory and not the other way around. And I feel very strongly about that. Because I think REBT is the more robust theory and would be the better vessel, theoretical vessel, the better framework for absorbing those techniques. Now, I'm sure Steve Hayes would not agree with me, but hey, it's a free country, last I checked. Go ahead, Wendy.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, you would say that, wouldn't you, given the fact that we're on an REBT, sort of channel, if you like.
No, I reserve the right to change my mind. Someday I may call myself.
No, indeed, yeah, indeed, yeah. When that happens, we'll call you Walter Hayes, perhaps. But no, look, I think the point is this: that I once suggested to a good friend of mine who's an ACT therapist that we should integrate REBT and ACT and call it REACT. But I didn't get anywhere with that because they do shy away from integration with other particular forms of therapy. And I think that in a way that there are certain ideas which I kind of agree with and kind of don't. For example, if you take cognitive fusion, the idea that with some people in REBT, they could spend so much time challenging their attitude, beliefs, and thoughts that they get fused with it. But that doesn't mean that all clients will, by any manner of means. And certainly for those clients who do tend to get fused as a result of challenging and disputing their ideas, I think it is important for them to actually kind of find a different pathway.
For
to
non-professionals, once you define fusion.
Fusion is when you get stuck with, you get sort of fused with the idea. You can't really step back, from it. You kind of, it's almost when you're fused cognitively, you become sort of kind of, sort of ruminating, with it. And certainly with certain clients that I've had who are kind of obsessive in their nature, that once they have a good idea, they can turn it into a bad idea because they're saying, I really have to dispute my idea so that I don't, that I no longer believe it in any particular episode. And if you have that, then you're going to be kind of stuck because it doesn't work like that. I actually have a sort of analogy. Is a bit like going to the gym. When you go to the gym, you spend half an hour, kind of doing weights, after which you need to allow your muscles to calm down a bit. You don't go to the gym until you are completely fit, because then that will be counterproductive. So I think that there are times when I would say it's important in REBT, most times for them, people to challenge and dispute their beliefs, but sometimes with some people, it's important for them to stop the challenging, to kind of, to mindfully accept you've still got these ideas in your mind, and then to act according to, to your values. So I think that there are ways of integrating at certain levels of the practice of the therapies. But I kind of agree with Walter. It's not something that I've seen ACT therapists do. They don't tend to integrate from REBT. We, if anything, we tend to more likely integrate, their ideas into what we do.
Okay. How about Mekri?
Good morning, Dr. Matwichak, Dr. Dryden.
Hi.
My question is, how does REBT fit with issues like borderline personality disorder, where what little I know about REBT, in my experience, I have a loved one with borderline personality disorder. It's a lot more than acceptance or replacing thoughts with, better thoughts or what have you. And you both touched on it a little bit in terms of that fusing of thoughts, but I just don't know how REBT would fit into treating something like borderline personality disorder.
Well, first of all, I don't like the nosology of the DS Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. So to me, when I look at a person, I don't think in terms of DSM diagnoses. What I do think of is in terms of behaviors that are self-defeating, emotions that are self-defeating, and cognitions that are self-defeating. And so when people speak of borderlines, they speak of extreme behaviors that are sometimes self-harming, often can be even the incidence of suicide is higher with borderline personality disorder. So you need to address behaviors that are going to undermine the psychotherapy and undermine their health. And so cutting and things like that. Now, the thing about REBT is that we're all the DBT skills that are aimed at helping people interrupt self-defeating behavior are not outside of our umbrella of the REBT model. If we're practical people, and if you have a person who's cutting and it helps them to stop cutting and go for a walk in 6-degree weather like we're having now, then I'm all for it. So the proof is in the behavior change. How you get that behavior change to occur is often through challenging, self-defeating, rigid, and extreme attitudes about the self and about other people. So borderlines will very often have a lot of interpersonal conflict that they need to improve their skills for coping with people. But I beg to differ with you that the way you depicted the REBT therapeutic process cognitively is not exactly how it is practiced well. So I'll stop there and let Wendy pick it up from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, I don't know, hasn't the terminology changed from borderline personality disorder to emotionally unstable personality disorder? I don't know, EUPD, is that the kind of new terminology? I'm not quite sure which I actually prefer, but anyway, you know, if either of them. But I think one of the things about REBT, we don't, because we have, if you like, a generic way of and a transdiagnostic way of actually viewing and actually kind of implementing you know, the therapy. We don't tend to write books on REBT with borderline personality, REBT with this particular condition, or actually that condition. So I think we have to kind of, you know, sort of ask ourselves the questions, is that what, you know, what is the person, because it is a label, you know, and what is the person coming for? My particular interest is what is the person coming for today, and what can I help them with today? So it's really a question of actually using the REBT. I think the differences over time, I think that having heard and talked to Albert Ellis about this when he was alive, he said that it's really important, you know, to really, you know, offer the person and to really the person to experience, you know, full unconditional acceptance from the therapist. I would say, because there is a skills component, if you can actually teach the person skills of actually intervening early, and I think this early intervention is really important across the board. If we can help people to identify what they are particularly vulnerable to and help them intervene with themselves early.
In the episode, you mean, the early
in the episode, yeah.
Right.
And I would say that, yeah.
A small fire, a small emotional episode fire,
That's right,
it's easier to
yeah.
put out than a forest fire.
That's right, and respond to that. You may not have control for these symptoms starting, but your control and your power is how you respond to that.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, those are, I think, you know, the kind of the ideas that, you know, REBT can actually bring to the table. Really helping people to fully accept themselves with their emotional disturbance is really kind of important. And that early intervention, you know, in the episode, I think is really crucial across the board, but particularly I think with people, you know, who are kind of more entrenched in their disturbance, because they can quickly become disturbed, and if they don't intervene with themselves quickly, they will maintain that. And the more you maintain it in the episode, the harder it is to actually get out of the episode.
Yeah, yeah. And then, of course, people with this diagnostic label sometimes can't bear their internal distress. So
That's right.
REBT's idea of upset about upset, it would apply.
Yeah.
I also think the duration of therapy is going to be considerably longer. I think having a strong therapeutic bond with the person and showing them through unconditional acceptance of them that you're with them, even when we don't agree with how they cope with their emotions or cope with their family or cope with things like that. So John Bowles, what question would you like to ask us? You're going to have to unmute yourself.
That's better?
Yep.
Okay. I need to give a bit of background before I can get to the questions. I'll read it. 25 years ago, I read 43 REBT books plus 32 monthly essays and an unknown number of newsletters from the Albert Ellis website. I took all sorts of notes, and many times my notes contained the location of where I read something. Unfortunately, 4 things I seem to remember Albert Ellis writing and never took notes on. And recently I tried to systematically find the 4 items I remembered reading and I failed. So I was hoping to screen share 5 items so Dr. Dryden or anyone for that matter might know where I can find them, so I can verify my memory is accurate. Unfortunately, screen share is off, and I'm guessing that's for a good reason, so I can
Let
read
me
them.
see if I could do it, but you start reading it and then I'll see if I can. Oh, there you go.
Is it okay
Yeah,
now?
it should be on now.
Okay. You can see that?
Yeah.
So the first item is the most important, or first 3 items are the most important. And I use the red keywords to help me search the book indexes manually and the monthly essays with a computer string search. Unfortunately, I don't have any PDF format RB2 books to string search.
Okay, so let's just read these. Ellis gathered, maybe with some help, gathered appropriate beliefs from 100 religions or cultures and a number of great philosophers. Then he selected for use in his therapy only the beliefs that met the gold standard of scientific provability for simultaneously increasing the odds. We will obtain all of 3 objectives: being happy, obtaining realistic goals, getting along with great majority of people. I have no idea where that would come from.
No, nor do I.
I wonder if it might have been a newsletter, because I don't have any newsletters now.
Bill Noss, in one of his books, wrote, all humans have at least 18,000 traits. Somewhere else I read these are listed in one of the dictionaries. I can't remember I read it or what dictionary it is in. Do you know? Wendy, do you know anything about this?
Not at all. Not at all. Sorry.
Ellis wrote, the religion that correlates best with REBT is the Catholic religion, with 80% of its beliefs matching what is taught. Well, I mean, Ellis used to talk a little bit about Judeo-Christian values. So, that might be found in something like, I would look in humanistic psychotherapy or the myth of self-esteem is the 2 sources that I would look for that.
Okay.
Humanistic psychotherapy or the myth of self-esteem, or even possibly in reason and emotion in psychotherapy.
That one I have.
I mean, I might suggest for number 3, I'm not quite sure, you know, again, I think that in a way, certainly number 3 and number 5, certain things I could imagine Albert saying, but not writing. I don't think he would ever write about you know, about psychoanalysis being crooks. He may have certainly said that, but I'm not sure he would write that. But number 3, I might suggest you look at the book, The Case Against Religion. I don't know if you got that, but that might be something that you might want to have a look at. And you know, William Noors is still around, and so if you could find him on the net, you can actually write to him. I don't know if you've written to William Noors at all.
Yeah, that 18,000 traits is in the I've got that book and I know exactly where it is, page 52 of the procrastination workbook.
All right. So
Yeah. Unfortunately, the first one was more important to me because it's very motivating. It's inspiring almost.
Yeah. Well, it might be something that you might kind of consider to be desirable to have, but not absolutely necessary.
Yeah, no. Well, the gold standard, I've read that the RBT and the CBT are the gold standard of psychotherapy.
John, have you read The Myth of Self-Esteem? You might want to look at that because that has something that would be a book of great interest to you.
Yeah, I've read the Overcoming the Rating Game by Paul Hawke. That's
No, The Myth of
That's a different-
Self-Esteem was written by Ellis.
Yeah. I
And
saw that one. I was quite interested in maybe buying that one.
yeah, do so. You'll find it very interesting. Alan.
Okay.
Okay, I'm in a car, so I have kind of sketchy service, so bear with me. Can you hear me?
Are you,
Yep.
You're not driving though, are you, Alan?
No.
Thank God for that.
Yeah, not that crazy. So I have a question about, should we pay much attention to unconscious factors? I haven't read much about that in REBT. And along the lines of integration, do you think that there's value in integrating psychodynamic therapy with REBT? Or if we have a client that's not getting better using cognitive therapies, should we have an open mind to unconscious processes and maybe refer or use those methods?
Should I kick off with that?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just following on from John's thing, if anybody who practices psychoanalysis is a crook, and you're advocating the question, should we integrate REBT with psychoanalysis? Does that make us a semi-crook? I don't know. But anyway, I think the idea is that rather than integrate therapies, I think REBT therapists are more interested in actually taking ideas that are useful. And I think that what Albert has written about is that he has taken the ideas of ego defensiveness, ways that we defend, our egos, or what we would say kind of ways that we would defend ourselves from actually self-condemnation. And again, it's going to depend upon how you define unconscious. Albert made the distinction between the implicit unconscious, which you can actually, kind of pay attention to if you are become aware of it, in the same way as when you are aware of the gorilla, you'll be able to see, that the gorilla is actually kind of as a participating in a particular, sort of activity, in which case, if you weren't expecting that, that's because you're not aware, because your attention is elsewhere. And the deeply buried unconscious, which we need to spend lots of time trying to kind of, sort of uncover. So I guess my answer would be, how are you defining unconscious? If you're defining it in terms of the more Freudian idea, I would say the answer would probably be no. If you're actually defining it in terms of the more implicit ways of us operating in the world, which if we can then find some way of paying attention to where we haven't paid attention to before, then I would say that's very valuable.
So the thing I would add is that because we don't die when we go to sleep, very often the content of our dreams are, in my view, expressions of wishes or fears or other emotionally laden material. And so if you wake up and you're aware of what you dreamed about, there's no reason why you might have emotional upset secondary to the dream content. So if you wake up, let's say you have a dream that you think is shameful, then you may wake up and think about that dream and say, oh, gee whiz, I shouldn't have that kind of dream. What of a bad person am I? Or on the other hand, you might wake up and say, geez, that was a great dream, because that's it's an unfulfilled desire. So I'm not so sure that if a patient brings up the discussion of dream content, it can't be thought of within the REBT framework, but I wouldn't necessarily pursue it as grist for the mill. But if it comes up, then we use it.
I just want to make two small additions to that. The reason why we have cognitive therapy today is because Aaron Beck, CBT version of cognitive therapy, is that Beck was actually testing the psychoanalytic hypothesis that depression is anger turned inwards. And he decided that the best way of actually kind of testing that is by looking at the content of people's dreams. Now, he found that rather than the content of people's dreams being reflected in the kind of anger, which you would expect it to happen if anger was turned inwards, they actually reflected the same levels of defeat, loss, failure. And so the theme of people's dreams are actually very linked to the themes that they are preoccupied in their waking life. Finally, and this may not be known to that many of you, Albert Ellis used to write a dream analysis column in Penthouse magazine. And so you might, those of you who are particularly interested in the historical aspects of REBT, try to find those little nuggets, because they're very interesting to read.
Wendy never disappoints. So, Miski,
Hi, I have two questions if that's okay.
all right, well, ask the first and then we'll go from there.
Okay, so the first question is, how do you keep at staying rational in your beliefs? And this is an exaggeration for lack of better words, in an irrational world. Like once you start adopting like REBT practices and philosophy, it's hard not to see irrational beliefs everywhere, and even harder not to be sucked away by it, especially when the beliefs are popular.
All right, well, in my view, they're not everywhere, but they're nearly everywhere. That's my general semantics pitch right there. But
Yeah.
in the event, the way I have on my desk lots of index cards that remind me of rational ideas. I have pens that have rational ideas on them. This one happens to say people will do what they want, not what you want. Accept this, rebtdoctor.com. I have my phone. I'm an old school guy, so I don't use my phone for appointments, but all the calendar appointments that pop up will say things like, you can bear more discomfort than you think you can. So what I try to do is create in my office here, I have pictures and items that are consistent with REBT theory. Right over here, you have David and Goliath. Or not David and Goliath. This is David winding his slingshot up. So I'm always trying to encourage people to be persistent. And in my hall, in my waiting room, I have a bunch of quotes from various philosophers. So my treatment begins in the waiting room, if you will. So I think you can create an environment that reminds you of some of the ideas that you want to cling to, and that will undermine some of the messages that a consumer-oriented, materialistic, non-REBT society might send your way.
Yeah, that's really helpful. My second question
No,
is,
wait a minute. Well, Miss G,
Oh.
can I if you're interested in what I've got to say,
oh,
that's
I'd
fine.
love to hear
If
what you
not-
have to say.
Okay, so I think what I would say is kind of predicated on the idea that a falsehood repeated thousands of times by thousands of different people does not make it true, and therefore I think it's important, to kind of recognize that just because a lot of people hold certain ideas, which we might call irrational, doesn't really make us, if you like, adopt them as well. So I think it's important to recognize that your brain, Miski, is really an important an important filter for
Yeah.
what you kind of perceive, in terms of the outside world. I mean, I also have my own ways of standing back and recognizing. So I've got two ways of doing it. One is when I hear an idea, I might use this card with myself, which says, right? and if it's really a nutty idea, I have this card, which so
I do it the old-fashioned way and just say it. He's much more diplomatic than I am.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, all right, there you go.
And what's your second question, Miski? Make it quick, please.
Oh, okay. So my second question is, do you know why REBT isn't as utilized or as popular compared to CBT that is used now? I only say this because, like, for example, when I went for OCD treatment, adopting REBT really helped instead of CBT, just because I felt like a lot of my disturbances came from my beliefs, not just my cognitive thoughts. Yeah.
I think
So,
there are.
Miski, where are you in the world?
Oh, I'm in the UK.
Yeah, okay, good, because I think it's useful to have a context for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a number of different reasons. First of all, I'll speak from the American side of the Atlantic, that I think we're enamored here with controlled trials, and we don't appreciate philosophy. And so REBT has fewer randomized controlled trials supporting its efficacy. And the ones that are done were there's just not as many. And so there's not as much of a research base. And in America, United States is enamored with science and not. And so I think that that's one problem, that there's a bias against REBT for that reason. I think two, it's damn hard. And I think selling people on challenging inferences, like they won't like me, she'll reject me, I'll say something stupid, is an easier thing to do with patients. I think REBT asks quite a bit of the psychotherapist and the client. And so therefore, I don't know if people like to take the shorter, easier path.
Yeah.
And then the third reason is Albert was not everybody's cup of tea. You know, he used very strong language for theoretical reasons, but also probably because of his own low discomfort tolerance and personal reasons. And
Yeah.
so sometimes when you use strong language, it can be very consistent with theory, but it can also be a sign of just poor judgment and low discomfort tolerance. So I think that he turned off the American crowd that way, maybe the worldwide crowd, but we're not philosophically oriented here in the United States, if you ask me. We're more technical.
That
I mean,
makes sense.
If I can add my 2 pennies worth, I think that Albert was once asked about where he saw REBT and what his hopes were, and he said, "Well, look, I'm not sure that REBT would exist as a therapy in the future, but I'm pretty sure that its ideas will exist in the future." So I think that if you look at a number of people who are actually taking, coming up with ideas, that they a lot of them have their roots in Ellis's work. Certainly, I see OCD as a rigid, pursuit of some kind of purity. Be it the purity of thought, the purity of action, the purity of feeling. And I think that when I ever treat anybody with OCD, it's that real focus on rigidity that really does bear fruit. And I think that other people kind of do that, but they don't really make that as a main focus. So I'm interested to hear what you have to say, Miski, that you found that the REBT was actually kind of useful for you in that sense.
So when I have like OCD, for example, I have several intrusive thoughts about the same topic. So the treatment, let's say I tackled one intrusive thought, like I shouldn't do this, I'll be okay after I tackle it, but I'll swap to something else. And I didn't know why I was in the cycle of having a similar theme. So for example, like sexual purity, for example, like I got over one intrusive thought and I jumped to another one. And then when I adopted REBT thoughts, and I was like, okay, I can accept myself, despite if I did something impure, quote unquote, sexually. It got rid of all the other intrusive thoughts that I had about it, because there was nothing conditional for me to like freak out about.
Right, exactly. So I think also you actually brought to the picture a general idea of how to deal with those thoughts rather than deal with them just one by one. And that's why I think REBT is good at dealing with both the specific and the general. We kind of span that continuum.
I often like to say REBT helps us live shamelessly, and so allows us to think the unthinkable, which I think that's where ACT is trying to help people do, is not avoid the unthinkable, but engage with it. And with REBT's concept of unconditional self-acceptance, you can think the unthinkable.
Yeah, it's really freeing.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So I want to answer a question that Kataki Hoshi put in here. He's in a noisy environment. Thank you for your courtesy. I would like to get your advice on the importance of self-work for a psychotherapist, and how can a novice REBT therapist such as myself go about it? Well, first of all, it is essential because, in my view, it's critical that psychotherapists practice what they preach. And REBT, I think, needs to be modeled for the patient, because I think the client and the patient studies the psychotherapist as much as the psychotherapist studies the client during the process of psychotherapy. And so it's essential and critical. Otherwise, you're telling people to do things that you yourself either can't bear It doesn't mean you have to be perfect. You can't perfect yourself. But in my view, I always try to ask myself, would I do this if it was appropriate for me? Would I do the difficult work? So it's essential. Now, the next thing here is, how do you go about that? Well, I think you have to take an REBT view of your life, look at where you escape from discomfort, where you rate yourself, and then begin to where you rate other people, and then do that self-work by challenging those attitudes about yourself, other people in life, so that you begin to have a healthy emotional response to those things that you don't have, unfulfilled desires, that you have healthy emotional responses to other people's life, and that you do the very things. If you smoke, give up smoking. Years ago, I gave up smoking, drinking, and that sort of stuff, because 30 some years ago, because Albert said the best REBT therapists are the ones who practice what they preach. And I had realized I had done enough of that nonsense, and that it was time for me to really invest in my career. And so I think that it's important that you do therapy on yourself. And the way you do that is you can work with an REBT therapist, but you could also work on yourself as a therapist. So that's how I'd recommend it, that you do an inventory of where you're avoiding, where you're downing yourself, and where you're demanding, and then push yourself to puncture those ideas. Good, Wendy, what do you say?
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. I think you've covered the ground. Do we have Bruce, Jorge, and Raffo, I think, on the line?
All right, so let's Bruce, what say you?
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, very interesting discussion. Dr. Dryden, what are some other ideas from other models or other therapies you integrate into helping your clients?
Well, I like the idea of working with different parts of a person. I think that's kind of useful, whether you're dealing with it in a sort of like a chair dialogue, or some kind of dialogue that you can have with different parts of yourself. I think that is a particularly useful way of actually going about things. I think that sometimes I like to kind of work with what you might call rationally emotive art therapy, because I think some people are and I think I have to guard against this. I'm not a very visual person myself, and therefore I have to kind of go out of my way to remind myself that other people are. And I think that having people draw, for example, if you ask somebody how big they feel in relationship to another person, you can get them to draw that, and then you could then ask them to draw it again, and actually kind of have them draw themselves the same size as the other person, and then you start having a discussion about what would it take for them to to actually, what they have to think and do in order to kind of be of the same size as the other person. So I mean, I don't see that much written about in REBT. So I think that it's more about, rather the thing is, rather than integrate, I like to create, and I think that particularly, maybe this is because I'm getting old, and I'm over 70, and therefore I like to create ways of working with people that I may not ever use again. I'm actually creating something that's going to be kind of helpful to that person at that particular time. So maybe create as well as integrate should be the clarion calls.
Jorge, go ahead. We have 5 minutes, so
Jorge, yeah.
Bustamante, dígame.
Thank you. First of all, Dr. Matweychuk, thank you very much for the work you do for this wonderful year. It's amazing. I love your site and these sessions. And Dr. Dryden, the same thing with you. I had the privilege of training with you way back in the day, and I really appreciate everything that I learned from you at the Ellis Institute.
Didn't we both have hair then?
Yeah, yes. We're now both brilliant therapists, but yeah. What can I tell you? I just wanted to circle back to what we're talking about with ACT. What I found was that still what makes our EBT so unique is to focus on the rigid, that rigid thinking, that inflexible thinking. And for instance, when I would help a client that was fused with something, when you get him unfused, I think what you find at the end of that little rabbit hole is a very rigid assumption about yourself, about others in the world. And I think that unless you address that at some point, it really is hard to come up with something that helps in the long run. So whatever strategy you use, whether it's relaxation, whether it's, I think at the end of that train, there is that very rigid, very inflexible idea that needs to be identified and reprocessed. Would you agree with that?
Walter?
I must admit, I was not 100% in on the thinking of that. I beg your pardon. I'll have to.
Okay. I think I mean I think the important thing I think in REBT is actually the ends rather than the means. And we're talking about particularly when we talk about sort of like philosophies or attitudes and beliefs, it's a working towards these things. It's greater self-acceptance. It's increasing flexibility and anything. And I think that the thing for me is with people, don't worry about the fact that you're starting to think rigidly or you're starting to putting yourself down. Use that as a clue a cue to stand back and practice the alternative philosophy and then act on that. And if you take those opportunities bit by bit to do that, you're like a gym, you'll develop greater self-acceptance, greater sort of tolerance of discomfort and things that you think you can't bear. And it's the kind of the daily drip by drip, rather than anything else that's big. The way you do that, I think, is going to be vary from person to person. Some people like to argue with themselves. Some people like to kind of act in ways that are consistent with ideas. Some people like to have visual ways of representing rational ideas. It's more about, those are the variability in terms of means. The ends are the same, working towards greater flexibility, greater self-acceptance. We don't do our clients a service if we argue that there is a point in which they have reached their pinnacle of self-acceptance and frustration tolerance, and that's it, because we're not built like that as humans.
Yeah. Okay. And two things here. Rafael was going to give us our last question today. And the second thing I'd like to add is that a recording of this can be found on the REBT Facebook group that our good friend, Matt Waters, is the administrator of. So Matt, thanks for your effort to maintain that group and herd the cats. So Rafael, can you please ask your question?
Hello, I want to know the difference between thinking rational and rationalizing. And if you can give us some tips not to fall into rationalizing.
That's a great question.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, I'll give you a very good question about that. That in terms of procrastination, if you are procrastinating because you think that you need a certain condition like comfort or a sense that you're going to be successful first before you do, and then you actually kind of show yourself that those conditions will be nice, but they're not necessary. I'm going to act even though I don't have them. That is rational thinking. If you're rationalizing under those conditions, you're going to come up with a way to explain why actually maybe what you're procrastinating on isn't really procrastination. You're lying to yourself. So in rationalizing, underneath that, you're lying to yourself. In rational thinking, you're not.
Right. That's exactly right. You're bullshitting yourself with rationalization. And thinking in a rational way is to think flexibly, non-extreme, realistically, adaptively, scientifically. So we're encouraging the latter and discouraging the former, if only to save our olfactory resources. So I'd like to indicate that next week I'm going to have this demonstration. It's going to be at the same time. I hope we celebrate New Year's Eve together. I will be getting up quite early to do it because I'm going to be in Hawaii trying to get a little fun in the sun. But in any event, I hope to see you again at the same time next week. And Wendy, thank you very much for joining me today. I always learn so much from you. And of course, everyone who joins me weekly, I really enjoy this and I thank you. And I'm sorry if I wasn't able to get to one of your questions. But fate permitting, we'll be here. And I always save that last 20 minutes for questions. So we can do it again. You could get your question in next time. Okay. Thank you,
Yes.
Wendy. You're the
Bye.
best. Over and out from Philadelphia.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you, guys.
Doctor.
Merry
Bye.
Christmas and great
See you
Happy
later.
New Year.
Bye.
Yeah. Happy
Bye.
holidays,
Thank
everybody.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Happy Christmas, everyone.
Thank you,
Have a good day. Bye-bye.